Welcome to Law Talk, brought to you by the Falvello Law Firm, my friends. Remember, you can contact them at 570-788-4191 or go to their website, falvellolaw.com. And of course, I'm here with the star of the show, the owner of Falvello Law Firm, Alexis Falvello. 100 years. Falvello's been in the law business, okay?
Yes.
And of course, your dad and I were very close, as well as your family. But you know, so you have all these lawyers around, you know, your aunts, your dad, and of course at the time your grandfather. Did you ever, did you ever discuss a case, you know, that you're working on among your siblings?
I do.
I mean, when your dad was and your grandfather were around, you were a lawyer when your grandfather was.
Yes, yeah. I was in the DA's office at that time.
Okay.
And I did actually work for a year with my dad prior to going to the DA's office. So, you know, there were times, yes, of course, I'd be foolish if I didn't lean on my dad and my grandfather, you know, when he was still living, because they are just a wealth of legal knowledge.
Well, you have Paul and Nina,
so,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, so you have, you know, lawyers all around. And I often wondered in the Falvello household, if there's a discussion that comes up about a particular case, was everybody always on the right track?
Well, I mean, what's your definition of the right track?
I mean, on the same course.
Well, I mean, you know, of course we have discussions, you know, about cases, you know, even if at family gatherings and things like that. Now, actually, I pull my brother in sometimes because he's a tremendous resource, given his medical background. If we have a case where there's an issue on causation, meaning whether or not the crash caused the injuries that the client is now presenting with, you know, prognosis moving forward, what are the, you know, what does it look like for this client moving forward if this client has these injuries? Sometimes I get the blessing of the client to review the case with my brother, so just so he can give me insight. I always say, can you, you know, because the medical language, just like the legal language, if you're not doing it every day, it is difficult to understand, right? And I always ask my brother to dumb things down for me, right? So the medical terms, even pronunciations can be difficult, but he can help with that. But yes, I lean on family members.
So I know Italians, every Sunday we would get together, families, for lunch, for dinner, like around 12 o'clock. We go to our mass in the morning, then we go to just come home, and sure enough, there'd always be something controversial to come up, you know, so my aunts, my uncles, and whatever. And then we would be able to try to discuss this without throwing potato balls around, etc. But I was always thinking about, you know, at your home, you know, when you're talking, come home and say, Dad, I have this case, or Nina, I have this case, or Paula, you know, and then do you agree to disagree on things?
That happens at times, but I think that only makes us, like me personally, as an attorney, more effective.
Yes.
Because, you know, my dad would always say, when looking at a case, you have to put a different hat on, see it from the perspective of the defense, and how is the defense going to present the case. So it's nice to kind of round table topics that are, you know, that your family members can provide insight on from a different perspective, just to anticipate maybe what the defense may say with respect to any case. And then I can take it to the plaintiff side of things and say, okay, what can I proactively do to minimize any potential defense that these insurance companies may come up with.
In law, have you found, in your experience, because you got 100 years in that was in the fellow, have you found, you know, things have changed?
Oh, sure. I mean, I remember hearing stories of, you know, if somebody was going to file something in Wilkes-Barre, any attorney in Hazleton then would look for other attorneys to see if they had anything to file, and so they can collectively take these filings up to Wilkes-Barre, to the courthouse for filing. Nowadays, a lot of times you can sit in your office and do it electronically. So the progression, certainly with time and technology, is definitely, you know, to our benefit, I would say, because I'm much more time effective then, because I'm not driving to Wilkes-Barre to file something. You could do it online. The other thing I always think about too, is research, doing legal research. And old school way would be getting out the book and paging through the book. Now it's a lot easier because of technology. There are different programs available that's specific to legal research where you can just type in these words that you're looking to kind of set off on, if you're researching like an underinsurance case, and you could just plug it in and then it'll bring up all these cases dealing with underinsurance. I think about my grandfather, my great-grandfather, his siblings, right, just sitting at a desk, paging through these books, the patience that it must have taken for them to be able to do that. I'm happy to have the technology.
Yeah, my gosh, yeah. The law books, and then you'd see your grandfather, Tony, would be going through a lot of stuff. Okay, how about in terms of legislation? In terms of, other words, the laws change sometimes. Okay, are there any things that you have seen throughout the year in your area where the law has been changed? Like if you're in an accident, or if you have you're suing someone, there's limits and whatever. Have you seen any major changes?
I haven't, no. As far on the civil side of things, I haven't seen many changes in the law, but the law is evolving constantly, and with respect to statutes, it's, I can't recall anything, of recent years that has changed, but there's always case law that's evolving, and the courts are always deciding cases that are fact specific based on, that particular case, and different holdings. We do, with case law, there is ongoing legal battles with respect to coverage and household coverages and things like that. Like I said, the law is kind of ever evolving.
They come from a family that's 100 years experience in the law, okay? As an average person, how would they interpret that?
Well, I think it's up to the person interpreting that. I've learned a lot about the law from the family members that came before me, but I've also learned a lot about how to approach the law from the family members that came before me. And that came with, just learning on how to be very detail-oriented, especially from my father. Because the details do matter, right? I had one case where a gentleman had a problem with his shoulder, and the defense attorney was saying, well, his shoulder symptoms didn't start for, 3 or 6 months after the accident. So, of course, if they're going to say that, I'm going to look back to the records, and, in his physical therapy records from 1 week after the crash, there was an indication that his shoulder was drooping in the weeks after. So they were trying to say, okay, this injury, which was pretty significant, is not related to the crash because his symptoms didn't develop until later. And the detail orientation is important in that case because I was able to look again at records that maybe the defense hadn't looked at, and I was able to say, okay, look, no, here he's having these symptoms, and it's within a week of the crash happening. So that I appreciate learning that from my dad because I think it makes me more effective on behalf of the clients that we're trying to help.
See, that's what I'm talking about. When you're coming from experience, that experience and knowledge means so much. And that's what many years ago. There's people used to be sue crazy. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue you, and lawyers who were not, let's say, the best in judgment would take any case on. Okay. Nowadays, it doesn't happen that way, does it?
Well, I think it depends. For me, you always want to make sure that the case has merit, that there's a reason to proceed with litigation. And sometimes those reasons are unknown to the people on the other side that you're filing suit against. For me personally, a lot of times cases proceed to litigation because insurance companies don't want to pay what I believe the value of the case should be on behalf of the client.
How do you determine that?
So it's a conversation with the client based on the facts that are presented, right? So sometimes you have cases where if you have an injured individual and if it's going to affect their ability to work, right? So say they work in a factory and they rely on their body to carry out their job responsibilities. and say their body is limited and they're not able to carry out their job responsibilities. You then want to get a report from a doctor who's going to say, okay, here are the issues and here are the restrictions that this individual is going to have in the workforce. And then you get it to a vocationalist that's going to say, okay, with this person's educational background and work history, and with these physical restrictions that they have with respect to the job, then this is going to be the potential loss of earnings that this person has. And say the insurance company is contesting the injuries even, they're contesting then the value of the case because we're assessing the value of damages to be, a certain number. And if the insurance company lowballs it, then we have no choice but to file suit against the other party. And it's, you name the individual driver, in proceeding with that. So, and again, that's a conversation to have with the client because you have to put money into these cases as far as these experts that you're putting money into, but it's really an investment to get money out of it. And again, if the insurance companies don't want to pony up, then sometimes you're left with no decision but to proceed to litigation.
Before I go to break, and I'm going to come back, I want to talk about behind the scenes, which I always wanted to talk to. I mean, we have a lot of great lawyers.
We do.
I mean, we
certainly do.
A lot of people who are just honest and hardworking. But when should you do a will?
Really, I think anytime you should do a will, because honestly, anything could happen to anybody at any point in time. And I always go back to my mom, being diagnosed with cancer. Fortunately, she came out of it. She's doing very well. She's healthy. She's been in remission now, right? It'll be, my grandfather's birthday was the day we found out that she was in remission. So I think it'll be 7 years now. That's crazy. Nonetheless, it's always important to have those documents because sometimes we get a call when it's too late. So with wills, like I said, that controls during when somebody passes away, but the powers of attorney are important during one's lifetime as well. So then your loved ones can manage things for you if need be.
Sometimes people are a little confused as to, they want to be fair. They want to be able to do that. And, you may have had an argument with your daughter, your son, your brother, your son, and then I'm not getting. Then all of a sudden reason has to set in. Can you be a guide in helping people?
Well, I tell people, because some people have reasons to either include or exclude people in their documents, and I'm not that. I haven't lived what the client has lived, and it's a matter of their personal preference. Really, my job is to make sure that they understand how important the documents are, and not only that they're competent and they're able to make these decisions and they're not under any type of influence from any outside sources or they're not under duress. So really, if somebody says, okay, I had a bad experience with my son, well, I would just prefer to not include him in the will, or, it's sad sometimes. You get clients that say, oh, I haven't seen my grandchild's 13, I haven't seen her since she was 3, so.
Well, so it's a difficult choice, but you have to, while you're living, is what you're looking at. Do they visit you? Are they concerned about you? Like you said, well, don't come in once a year and then expect everything when your other siblings are there doing all the stuff that they're doing. And it's always the case that when something happens, well, you got everything. Well, because I was here
sometimes
every day.
Right. Well, and that's really, I don't get involved in any of that. I just, again, make sure they know what they're talking about.
You never hear, well, what do you think?
We do.
What do you think,
sometimes.
Alexis?
Hey, I always say, I think you should do what you think is best, So for you, because that's really what it's about.
We come back, we're going to talk about behind the scenes, my friends. We're talking to Alexis Falvello from Falvello Law Firm. This is Law Talk. Thank you for the comments. There's a lot of you that have asked me to ask, Alexis, a lot of questions. So it's sam@ssptv.com. Email them to me, and I'll pass them on to Alexis when we do our show. Stay with us. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Law Talk, brought to you by the Falvello Law Firm. Remember, folks, FalvelloLaw.com or 570-788-4191. I'm talking to the owner of Falvello Law Firm, in business practicing law over 100 years, Alexis Falvello. Alexis, so sometimes, like going to a doctor and you're something wrong with you, okay? The doctor who has experience, you'll go through tests, etc. He or she knows a lot more about what your problem is. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they have to be careful as to what they're saying, because there's things that they know that they cannot tell the patient until they go through some things, okay? Mm-hmm. All right, so now when you, as a lawyer and having the experience that you have, when you get a call from someone's watching the show, mm-hmm. They were in an accident, they don't know what they should do, they're confused, their friends tell them to do this, their family tell them to do that, don't do this, don't do that, call this person. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I don't want a friend when I'm calling a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I don't want a friend, I don't want a nice person.
Right.
I want a person who understands the law of what my problem is. Mm-hmm. So you could be my next door neighbor. I can't say that because I had a lawyer next door, but I'm just saying you could be the nicest person in the world. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have the experience, so you seek for the person who has the experience. With that being said, mm-hmm. once you get a call that a person was in an accident and they're having what takes place then? What do you do?
In my office, what I like to do, there are two things. I always tell a client, let me take the stress of the legal stuff off of you. Let me just handle that, and you could focus on getting to the doctor and getting better. Because it is not a fun experience. I'm meeting these people that become, they're clients, but you also develop friendships with them.
Yes.
Throughout the course of your representation of them. And you want them to be able to focus on getting better for their own well-being and for their family's well-being. So the other thing I do too is I never tell a client what they want to hear. I tell them the truth because I'm not doing the client any favors by telling them what they want to hear, right? It's not fair to them to say, okay, some ask about case value. From the beginning of a case, I could never tell you because oftentimes injuries are treated very conservatively at first. And if those measures fail, they have to get a bit more aggressive. And if the symptoms don't resolve, of course, the value of the case is a lot higher. But the other thing is, too, you have to look to see whether or not there are actual, I say cookie jars, right? So if the person responsible for hitting you only has $15,000 in coverage and you have catastrophic injuries, unfortunately, that's all you look for unless you have underinsurance coverage. And I could get into the details.
No, we
of
talked about that so many times.
Right.
Full tort, definitely have it. And
yes,
you got to look at all
absolutely.
of those things. And
right. Right. So, but in full tort, that's another thing. I tell clients, okay, look, if you're limited tort, here's what we're working with. We can pursue economic damages, but the pain and suffering really you can't pursue unless certain exceptions apply. And there are several, that come to mind, but sometimes in the beginning of a case, you don't know if those exceptions apply.
How do you determine whether it is a real case or someone just, trying to collect some money here? Well,
I always look to medical records, right? I with clients, if they're saying, oh, I'm not feeling well, or this, I have pain here, these are my symptoms, yet they're not going to the doctor. You need to have those medical records that are going to outline what the injuries are through either the symptoms, which would be the subjective findings, but also any objective findings that you can get in the form of, MRIs, x-rays, things like that are going to say, okay, this is more solid evidence of an injury, but it's important to treat. And, again, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes as far as, who's going to pay for your lost wages. If you have that coverage, I can navigate that. Who's going to pay for your medical bills? Of course, I navigate that. Then you have property damage. So if the vehicle is damaged and although you're injured, you're still able to work, but you're not able to get to and from work, we can help the client out with all of that.
All right, keywords of advice. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if someone gets in an accident or someone hits them or if you hit somebody, what's the first thing they should do?
Well, even at the crash scene, I encourage clients to take photos. So if they're
capable.
So if they're able to do so, that's correct. because that's helpful too. Sometimes there's issues. I had a case recently, a lovely couple unfortunately was hit by a tractor trailer on the interstate, but that tractor trailer took off, right? Under those circumstances, unfortunately, the clients were so badly injured that there was no way they could have taken photographs. So what I did was looked to various media outlets to see whether or not that was reported, and even social media. Sometimes people post things on social media. Actually, we found one in that case, or the family actually found one in that case where somebody had driven by the crash scene and taken video.
Wow.
Of the crash scene, yes. So
you didn't know who the truck was, and you found it.
Well, we weren't able to find the truck, but there were other two involved tractor trailers, unfortunately, but they weren't at fault.
So here again, when we talk about experience, okay, and like I said before, we have many lawyers in this county, in both counties, Schuylkill, Luzerne, have a lot of experience. But in your case, you then will decide whether, after you researched or looked at, saying you do have a case, Mr. Lasant, or you don't have a case?
Well, sometimes we don't know when we first take on a client.
Okay.
But
when is that point that you do know?
Well, to say, you're involved in a crash, you have limited tort, you don't have any lost wages, in that case, it doesn't, if you have nothing out of pocket, it doesn't make sense for me to represent you. But say we get the police report back and that person was struck by a drunk driver. Well, that's an exception to limited tort, and then we can pursue the pain and suffering damages. So it just depends on the circumstances of the case. But we try to do our best to look at it from every angle to ensure that we can do what we can on behalf of the client.
Right. Now, as a lawyer, you cover a lot of things, okay? But you have your estates, you have wills. I meant to say that you do have estate. You cover estates.
Yes, we do estate.
But your primary focus is on what?
The personal injury side of things. The car accident. And again, my time in the DA's office kind of transitions and overlaps into, what I'm doing, on behalf of clients in the private sector, because that allows me. It's just in my nature, I think, to be someone who's kind of, going after and seeking justice. Not that defense attorneys don't do that. I don't mean that, but it's just kind of more in my nature to be on the plaintiff side of things.
So let me ask you a personal question. Okay, why did you become a lawyer?
Okay, so I'm on the board at United Charities, right? And my great-grandfather and his two siblings lived in United Charities. Well, I worked there in the summer of 2000 and 2001 when I was in college. And, the boys at that point in time, we had like 60 plus kiddos, and they were from elementary school right up to high school. And I remember asking the woman who was our executive director at the time, when these kids go to court, who represents them? And she said to me, I do. And I'm thinking, okay, you have like a social, your degrees in social work. And she said, well, I just put makeup on, bat my eyes, and hope for the best.
Wow.
And that really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, if I go to law school, maybe I could do something to help these kids, and be a voice for these kids. And then when I was in law school, I interned in the district attorney's office in Luzerne County, and I loved it. And then, I was a prosecutor for 8 years, and I did that line of work. So
hence you become a lawyer.
So, and now, well, I'm in the private, I'm doing private practice now, but I still enjoy it.
But you see, sometimes you see doctors, their kids become doctors, and because they're in the environment. So you said that, but it's always it's always nice to know who the person is that you're doing. Like your brother Tony, who is an excellent surgeon in the hips. He's very thorough, but he's very warm and considerate. Okay. And because you, like you said, when someone comes to you, they have a problem.
Yes.
And you need to be as comforting as possible. And folks, I'm talking to Alexis Falvello, Sam at ssptv.com. This is Law Talk, and falvellolaw.com, 788-4191. Give them a call. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. We'll see you next time.